Anyway, all right, here we are. Yay. Thank you again for being flexible with all of our scheduling. Last week was very difficult for me mental health wise, and I just could not get my shit together. So here we are a week later and I'm doing a little better.
Anyone who's followed my work will know that, trust me, I get it with mental health. Yeah. Sometimes we just need to do what we're what we need to do, really.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, mental health doesn't always pick the most convenient times to
it really
become
doesn't.
an issue.
In fact, I'm pretty sure it does the exact opposite.
What I found is really fun about being schizophrenic is that my mental health kicks off whenever anything gets stressful. So if I'm trying to deal with anything important that causes any level of stress, my brain's like, now is the moment to lose touch with reality.
How convenient.
Like, I see you doing these important things, but have you considered that none of this is real?
Yeah, what have you thought about? Like, for a second. Oh my god, that's too real. Too real. Yeah. All right. Are we ready to dive in?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. And for those who are joining us, you are welcome to add comments to the comment section in the Facebook player. I will do my best to pay attention to them. I'm going to be jumping back between this and notes. So yeah, we'd love to have you contribute as you see fit. Okay, so David, let's do some physical descriptions for our viewers in case we have visually impaired folk, and then we'll do a little bit of a bio for you, like just to introduce who you are to my blogger people, my followers, and then we'll get into the actual interview. So I'll start, I guess. Hi everybody, my name is Autistic. I use they and it pronouns. I am a non-binary white human with short shaved sides on my head and longer bleach blonde hair on top. And I'm wearing a red shirt, and behind me is part of my room that is hard to describe. It's like, I got curtains, I got a thing over here that says we're all mad here. It's like a drippy Alice in Wonderland tapestry and some fuzzy, like I don't know, stuffed animals and stuff. Anyway, and then David.
So I am David Gray-Hammond. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white Mediterranean male with a shaved head, a beard, thick rimmed glasses, a lip piercing, and an ear tunnel. I'm wearing a white CJ's Great Escape t-shirt, and I'm sat in a room that is largely blue, except for some twinkling lights on the back wall that are multicolored, and I'm sat next to a bookcase that everyone is convinced will fall on me one day.
We're just waiting, and we don't want to see it. I do love the twinkly lights though, those are great. Good stuff. All right. So David, do you mind just giving a quick elaboration on your bio, like who you are, what you do?
Okay, so I'm David Gray-Hammond. As I said, I run the blog Emergent Divergence, and I also own a consultancy business called DGH Neurodivergent Consultancy. I have been writing for the autistic community since about 2018, I think. Was relatively, people enjoyed my writing, but it really took off when the Boycott Spectrum 10K stuff started up. And suddenly I had thousands of people descending on my website all at once, which was very anxiety provoking. And yeah, I co-author blog series like Creating Autistic Suffering and the Neuroqueer series with Tanya Ravkin and Katie Monday, respectively. I am a regular educator over at Academy, and I also co-host their especially interesting podcast, as well as host my own podcast, David's Divergent Discussions. But primarily, I am an autistic ADHD schizophrenic author, and I wrote the book, The New Normal, Autistic Musings on the Threat of the Broken Society. That's the one.
This is the one. I gotta say, from an accessibility standpoint, I love how you printed it. I love that it is larger than life. It's thin, so it's not so heavy for me to hold. And there is so much spacing with larger font, so I can make notes if I want, but it's also, I'm sure, better for people who, again, are more visually impaired than I am. And also the matte finish is just so nice. I love this texture.
Me too. That's why I went for the matte finish.
Hell
Like, it's
yeah.
gonna feel so nice.
It feels so good. I love holding it. Like we aim to please when we're sensory seekers, right? Oh god. All right, awesome. Thank you for all of that. Yes, I do have, if you check the video description, y'all, there is a link to David's book on Amazon. You can buy it for yourself and feel that lovely texture on your own time. It's great. Okay, well, David, thank you again for being here. I am so excited to dive into your musings, as you say on the book title. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, what inspired you to write this book in particular to begin with?
It kind of arose naturally. I've wanted to write a book for pretty much my entire adult life, and probably most of my childhood as well. But I have been writing these blogs for years on my website, emergentdivergence.com, and I started to see, like, I had clusters of essays, and in them there were like themes evolving. And alongside this, a very important book to mention here, because it's very responsible for the existence of this book, is Nick Walker's Neuroqueer Heresies. I had read Neuroqueer Heresies end of last year, and it kind of transformed my thinking. Like, and I became very hyperfixated on normative violence in society, effectively. You know, the way that society teaches us there is one correct way of thinking, feeling, expressing. And I was like, well, that's bullshit. I'm not having this. And I kind of went through the essays on my blog, and I pulled some out and I started reworking them with my new knowledge, because some of them are years old. So, you know, if you look at the essays they're based on from like way back, you'll find them quite different essays, because we're talking about stuff I started writing when I had literally just discovered I was autistic and literally just discovered the community. You know, I was rewriting and reworking them, and before I knew it, I had a book. And in fact, I said this on another interview, people think I spent months and months writing this book. Well, in a sense, I spent years writing the original essays, but the bit where I changed all the essays and reworked them, it was probably between 6 and 8 hours of intense hyperfocus. You know, it came with all sorts of weird ideas, like, how can I put David in this book? I know, I'll make it as chaotic as me by setting the entire contents off by one page, which seemed like a really, really good idea when I'd had like 5 cans of energy drink at 4 o'clock in the morning. And now I'm sat here like, that's not as good an idea as I thought it was, because no one knows I've done that on purpose.
Honestly, reading it, like, for the first half of it, I was like, why? Fucking why? Like, why? And then I realized, oh, this was intentional, because it was like, it was the whole thing. And honestly, after giving it some pause and thought, I genuinely loved it, because it allowed me the space and time to digest and internalize what you had written the pages before, because it was just blank the next page almost until the very bottom, you know, like, so I had so much, it was like designed for me to breathe through what I was reading almost, and then like I could like take each chunk at a time without getting overwhelmed, basically,
I
because
think that's
this is
something.
heavier stuff too. It's not a
Yeah,
light a light
no,
book.
it's not. It's not. And I kind of, I wanted to reflect my own mind's working around this stuff, because
Mm,
I am thinking about heavy stuff a lot of the time. It's just the way my brain works.
same.
But amongst all the chaos are these moments where I stop and breathe,
Yeah.
and they're completely unpredictable as to when they'll come and how long they'll last for. So I kind of wanted that to be reflected in the book.
Yeah.
Um,
You
and
nailed it.
yeah. Um, so, I mean, I probably won't be revisiting that format for
Yeah.
future books, because
Fair
I
enough.
just don't think it's quite as clever as I thought it was at 4 o'clock in the morning. But you know what? I'm happy with it. You know, there is an option there for me to go back and reformat the whole book, but people seem to really like it. So,
Like I said, like it resonated after I allowed it to, you know, like I
yeah,
wasn't used to it. It was brains and change, right? Like
yeah,
not my favorite. So like it was hard to digest at first, like to really accept. And then once I got through, I was like, oh no, this is purposeful. Like three quarters of the way through, I was like, okay, I can accept this and like allow it to do something for me. And when I did, it was like breathing. Like I was allowed to take a breath after each chapter, kind of thing. So I think it was fun.
was also a nod sort of to a very pertinent theme throughout the book, which is neuroqueer theory, that idea
Right,
of subverting
right.
expectations, because it is not what you expect. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah,
um,
you're embodying it and you're
yeah,
like in the way that you published it. Absolutely.
yeah.
That's so
So,
cool.
you know, I sort of had these two things of like, I want the book to reflect me, which is a very neuroqueer person, but I also want the book to be, and when I was thinking about accessibility, truthfully, I was thinking, what would make this book easy for my dyslexic, arthritic 64-year-old mother to read? And that's how the book ended up the way it is.
I love that. I love that so much. Like I said, very, very accessible. So I'm grateful that you put all that thought into it. Awesome. So we already heard a little bit about the process through you answering that question. So I'm wondering, additionally, like what hurdles did you come across while you were writing this book? Like what challenges did you have to overcome or push through?
Some people might ask why I self-published. The truth is, the book wasn't really long enough for most publishers to pick it up. So I went down the self-publishing route, and I was looking around, and most self-publishing companies, you've got to be in a great deal of financial privilege to be able to self-publish. And people are like, oh, is your book available anywhere other than Amazon? And the truth is, at the moment, no. And that's because Amazon, to my knowledge, are the only place you can self-publish for free. And so I don't like Amazon, but the
No.
royalties they offer me are very competitive.
Okay, good.
Um,
That's
you know,
something
we're
at least.
talking, you know, I get like more than half of profits, you know,
Wow.
which is fantastic because I have a newborn son who I need to be able to feed.
Right.
And as a
Yeah.
disabled person, you know, making money in this world is not easy. And there's a whole other conversation about how much I hate the existence of money, which you might pick up on in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know, capitalism sucks, but it exists, and we have to do the best we can with it.
Unfortunately.
So long story short, the biggest hurdle I really had to overcome was saying I don't like Amazon, but they are realistically my only option for self-publishing at this moment. I have submitted a book to a publisher, which I hope will come out next year. And I'm hoping that because it's going through a proper publisher, also the publisher I submitted it to is very good at working with neurodivergent people. So I'm hoping that means it'll be available in more places than just Amazon, which might make it more accessible to the people who ethically decline to use Amazon, which is completely valid. And yeah, you know, we can see how it moves forward from there. I will say I'm also working on an audio book. That's been another hurdle to overcome, because it's meant that I've had to get around my executive dysfunction and listen to people's auditions and, like, you know, make offers of royalty shares and things, because once again, I'm not financially privileged enough to pay people money up front, you know. Yeah, I do run a business, but truthfully, you know, like every other disabled person, I am just getting by, and I'm not really doing this for the money. You know, I'm doing it because I believe in the cause. And because I'm not doing any of what I do for the money, I have very little money. um, so yeah, the biggest hurdle has probably been finances, really, because the world seems quite well set up to keep poor people quiet.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the foundation of our existence, basically. Like, keep the poor poor and the rich rich. And
when we start, you know, having means to talk about how crap it is being poor and marginalized, it threatens the system.
It does, you know. And I feel like that is oh, now my brain just went and did a thing. It flew to the left or right, so it flew away. Okay, we were talking about systemic oppression, essentially, right? Which honestly, okay, that we'll just skip whatever that thought was of mine. But I really do appreciate throughout your book, not only do you touch on your own participation in systemic oppression, whether you're the subject of it or a perpetrator of it because of your privileges, like recognizing privilege, discussing it openly, breaking down the barriers of taboo, essentially, and then also addressing systemic oppression in ways that you are affected, your community is affected. I loved how you brought intersectionality into the book. Like, we need these, you're right, these are the conversations that the people in charge don't want us to have, basically, because the more we expand our understanding of how the world actually works, the more charged we can be to do something about it, the more we can organize and unify, basically, to make change happen. And I so appreciate your dedication to getting this published. I think it was very comprehensive, and I mean, I agreed with all of it, naturally. Like, just I think there was like one thing that I had a question about, but we'll get to that. Anyway, so speaking of, I'm just gonna go like topic to topic, and we'll see where the conversation takes us, essentially. But I do want to start, like, is there anything in commentary of your work that you would love to emphasize or like bring to people's attention specifically when they go and read the book, or after they, like, is there anything off the top of your head that you would like to really drive home for people?
Something I really wanted to get across was that in order to fix what's broken in our world, we first have to understand our own place in it. Mm-hmm. Which means having an uncomfortable conversation with ourselves about how we have contributed to the not so nice things in the world. That's why I talk about my own privilege in the book, because yeah, I'm neurodivergent and queer, but I'm also a cisgendered white male. I have a lot of privilege, and whether I've been aware of it or not, that privilege will have contributed or benefited from at points, right, the oppression of other marginalized groups. Right. And I not only wanted to make people aware of their privilege in a society, and that's not to say that everyone's lives are easy, because we all have our own challenges, and some of them can be dreadful challenges to face. But not beyond privilege, I wanted people to think about the fact that we talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence a lot in the autistic community, but the main things that get mentioned are autism and ADHD. for me, neurodiversity and neurodivergence are much broader than that. And you have to look at, when you talk about the pathology paradigm, it has pathologized almost every aspect of human experience. You know, there is a disorder for just about every expression of the human self. And I wanted people to recognize that, you know, writing from my perspective, I'm autistic and ADHD. So people are like, yeah, cool, you're neurodivergent. I'm also schizophrenic. Most people would say, well, that makes you mentally ill. I don't view it as an illness, because I do suffer when I'm having a psychotic episode, but also my psychotic episodes are transformative. They give me an opportunity to have a level of introspection into my own relationship with myself and the world around me that other people would have to take all sorts of weird substances to have. You know, what I want people to realize is that they're, no matter what society says, no matter what the powers that be say, there is no one correct way of existing. Every existence is valid. You know, as long as you are not overtly harming people, then your way of existing is valid.
100%. Thank you for driving that home. That was one of the bigger concepts that I wanted to talk about, actually. So cool. We're just gonna dive right in. The more I learn through the neurodiversity movement, the more that I deconstruct gender and social constructs on the whole, right? I loved, okay, now I'm doing the ADHD thing. Or follow me, folks, just stay with me, okay? We'll get back around to shit. The way that you talk about neurotypicality, and how, I think it was Nick Walker possibly that also corroborated this idea, and I've been believing in this for a while now, is neurotypicality isn't a neurotype so much as it is a performance. It is a construct, right? Where neurodivergence, the concept of neurodivergence itself is also a construct, because we're believing that we as neurodivergent people are neurodivergent because we don't fit the mold of neurotypicality. And there is a neuronormative narrative, lots of N's, I love alliteration, at play, where our existence, our existence is valued based on how we fit that mold, that performance of neurotypicality. And people who do perform well are deemed neurotypical because just that, they can perform it well. It's not that they don't have their own divergences here and there, or their quirks or whatever. It's that they fit the mold and they're not burned out from it most of the time. And then you have neurodivergent folk who are burned out from it a lot of the time, where our quirks are too noticeable, are too much to hide, are maybe disruptive according to other people, and are deemed as pathological, like we need to be fixed. As you talk about in your book, you're constantly like, we are not broken, we are not needing of fixing, we are just who we are, living in a world that does not serve us, that does not allow our existence in the ways that it allows neurotypicality. And so I so appreciate that you talk about that, where we don't have to see ourselves like we're just human. I've been doing this work also with deconstructing gender. Like, the more that we embrace xenogenders, like new genders, there are as many genders as there are people, folks. Because we can agree on groupings like man, woman, trans man, trans woman, non-binary, just the list goes on, right? We can agree that there are groups so that we feel community.
No, if anyone wants to argue the science there, my lecturer, who was from the University of Oxford when I did human evolution at university, said that actually white-centric culture is basically the only culture in the world that only has two genders. Nearly every other culture in the world has multiple genders.
Yep. And if you're gonna base, sorry, this is kind of tangential, but if you're gonna base your theory of gender on biological sex and claim that there's a binary there. Sex itself is not binary. It's a lot more complicated. It's on a spectrum. Yes, there might be like binary elements that are at play with each other, but it's still a spectrum of existence. We apply meaning in a binary way because that's what we've been taught. Like I could go on and on and on, but this is what I'm saying. Go ahead.
What I wanted to get across is the fact that binaries of all sorts, but in particular neurotypicality and neurodivergent, they are a function of neuronormativity.
Yes.
Because neurotypical, what we consider neurotypical changes depending on the culture you're in.
Right.
You know, the autistic community's understandings of neurotypicality are very white-centric, sort of Christo-European culture.
Yep.
Neurotypicality changes from culture to culture. It's not a fixed point, and therefore neurodivergent changes from culture to culture. It's only sort of like the Western medicine system that has medicalized these ideas of being autistic, ADHD,
right,
that has created this alternative that is neurodivergent. And yet I identify with the label neurodivergent because for me it is a counterculture. We are fighting back against the normative idea that we have to be like the neurotypical people.
Yeah.
But also the neurotypical people aren't like the neurotypical people. They're just really good at pretending to be all the same, but they're not all the same. None of us are the same because our brains are all different. And, you know, this idea that we are all biologically in either the neurotypical or the neurodivergent camp is just as weird to me as the idea that we're all biologically male or biologically female, because it's not that simple. Like, it is a performance, you know, like if you can perform to a cultural standard of normal, you're neurotypical.
Right.
That doesn't mean your brain is neurotypical. It just means fake it.
Right. God. So this is, and this is what I'm saying is like, that can apply to any social construct. That's why I brought up gender. Like that's what humans do. We agree to believe on a concept and then make rules and roles based on that concept that doesn't actually help anybody. Like it blows my mind. It blows my mind. And I also love that you made a statement about just because it's in the DSM doesn't mean it's an actual problem. Like, we have a society, because of colonialism, really, we have a society based on one, like you're saying, like one type of one neurotype, one expression, one way of living, like one acceptable one way of living, right? And if our brain, don't do this again. Hang on. This was important. Hang on. Okay, we're talking about colonialism and so our colonialist understanding of what is acceptable, right? Go to another part of the world, like you're saying, it's culturally contextual. And that just disproves the actual validity of the constructs that we deem. It's just, it blows my mind. And like people who are autistic or, you know, not cisgendered or whatever, and a lot of those cultures, we're seen as people who like pioneer culture, like who set a new normal, who like innovate and bring out the best in society. Like a lot of the time we're not seen as degenerates. That's typically a Western conception of autism or transgenderedness or what have you, like to be the other. And something I do appreciate talking about the binary and binary terms of neurotypical versus neurodivergent, because that's the system we do live in. But it's also not a us versus them argument, because we're literally all negatively affected by the system that we exist in. So,
what benefits from this system except a few people right at the top? And this is really, I think, one of the biggest themes that comes out of the book I wrote is that deviation from normal will be punished unless it's exploitable. You know, so if what is normal to you does not benefit what is normal to the people who set these weird normative rules.
Yep.
And they don't even realize they've set these rules, because they've kind of based it, that it's all arisen out of a system that is like generate profit, pay taxes,
Right,
keep
right,
you people very rich, even though they don't need all that money.
right.
Like, because of our capitalist system, we have this weird set of rules on how you should think and act. And that weird set of rules exists because people have decided that's the best way to generate profit.
Right.
And like Western culture especially really loves generating profit. And
At the expense and exploitation of those who make it for the top few.
Yeah,
like that's
and this is why you've got that weird thing of high functioning, low functioning. People don't like to admit it, but low functioning just means your disability can't be exploited to generate profit, and high functioning means that you can innovate and create new things that will help people generate profit. That's what high functioning and low functioning mean. It's about whether you can or cannot produce profit. And I really wanted people to, I wanted to get my disdain for capitalism across in this book.
You did. You really did.
I think I did a podcast recently with for the especially interesting podcast for Academy. And I remember I said we were talking about coffee, and I said, you know what? I like my coffee as bitter as my disdain for the capitalist dystopia that we live in.
Which requires coffee, by the way. It is like a it's a catch-22, folks. Okay, like I swear to God, quick caveat or tangent again. I went to New York City for the first time as an adult in September, and I shit you not, there was a coffee store on every side of every block almost entirely. Like some of them just said coffee. Like I lived in a dystopian, I mean we do, but like it was so surreal is the word I'm looking for, I think, where like I saw how addicted we are to caffeine because we need it to literally pump out productivity for the machine. Like just,
it is a good and acceptable addiction to have because it fits the system. You know, you don't see like shops that have the words heroin written across them, because that wouldn't help people make money, like apart from the people selling the heroin, you know.
Oh my God, too true.
You know, like the system is completely absurd, and that's what I wanted people to see. That's why my book's called The New Normal, because the new normal is the most absurd thing that people don't like. People are like, oh, I love dystopian literature. I'm like, yeah, but we're living in a dystopia. You don't need to read fiction about it. Just go outside.
Just walk around.
Like,
oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna read some comments that I forgot to look at earlier. Okay. So we have Bobby saying, let's be realistic, privileged men decided the DSM. That is absolutely accurate. Just like privileged men created society on the whole, basically. We have and white men.
About this, actually, I've been reading a book, this one called Sedated by James Davies.
Oh, you did mention that. Yeah.
He talks in this book about the fact that the disorders in the DSM, they're not in there through like peer-reviewed research. Basically, they get like 10 to 15 psychiatrists together who go like, here's a cluster of behaviors. How can we label them and turn them into a disorder? And that's how things end up in the DSM.
Yep.
Like, they are all privileged white men for the most part.
Yes, correct. And we have a long history, at least I know in the United States, of practicing eugenics by literally scooping people up against their consent and putting them in asylums and institutions. Like they were asylums, now they're institutions. It's the same shit. It's same barbaric shit, okay? Where people for having neurodivergent differences who aren't harming anybody typically, they don't want them to reproduce. They don't want them to be anything but put in a box, to not be as burdensome on society. Like it's honestly horrific. The power that language has on the lived experiences of people who don't fit in. And even for people who do fit in, right? Language is powerful in any instance, but especially for those who don't fit in. And I just got to say, like, especially when it comes to mental illness, right? Like you mentioned schizophrenia. And I love how you spoke about your experience just earlier, how it's like, it gives you an opportunity. Yes, they can be scary, those episodes, but it gives you opportunity that most people don't have access to unless they do a lot of drugs, to find introspection and connect back to yourself and learn things about yourself and the world around you. I think that's a super healthy way to look at it. And I'm really glad that you found that perspective, because I'm starting to find the same for myself and my mental illnesses. When really, if you're going to keep calling people mentally ill, maybe look at the source of what causes that illness. Like, we're not born with it, we acquire it. Like, you do talk about that in the book.
And this is something I try to get across in the book, is we should think more in terms of well-being than illness.
Yes.
Because when we call someone ill, we are centering the problem in them, when actually the problem is almost inevitably external. It is to do with the environment. It is the people in the environment, or things that have happened that have traumatized the person to a point where their well-being is now in the shitter.
It's altered.
Like,
and you do talk about how trauma, I mean, we can look at the science in other places, but you do mention like the trauma of living in a world that doesn't serve people properly and accommodate and support and celebrate. You talk about how that does cognitively like affect the structural parts of our brains. So you do change as life affects you, and you acquire these quote unquote illnesses because of systemic problems. It is like you're saying, it is not the individual that is at fault here for most of what's going on. And it's not even at fault. It's just, we're seeing cause and effect, essentially.
When you think about it, our entire sense of identity and self is built through interactions with our environment. You know, everything we understand about ourselves is in some way led by the way people and the environment have responded to our existence. So if we are in an environment that constantly tells us you are not the right sort of you,
right,
we are going to develop a poor sense of well-being and a negative sense of self. And I really wanted people to understand the responsibility we have to other people, in that the way we treat others, the things we expect of others, is going to directly affect how they see themselves.
And I think that speaks to the double empathy problem, right? And I think it's not just autism, like it's not just autistic empathy and neurotypical empathy. I think this can be applied to just one individual to the next individual. It doesn't matter who they are or what their neurotype is. Like, if we do not have empathy for each other and extend ourselves to the point of assuming the best in them and working together and communicating the best we can, the comprehension is never going to happen. There's always going to be vitriol and hate. There's always going to be discrimination, and that produces what we see every day. You know,
this is why the intersectionality stuff is so important. Because the double empathy problem rests on the idea that neurotypical people, or people who perform neurotypicality, struggle to communicate with autistic people and vice versa, because fundamentally we have different experiences, that we don't understand each other's experiences, and therefore you get this communication breakdown. And in the same sense, we have to think in terms of intersectionality and our own privilege, because we have to be aware that someone else may have experiences that we are not aware of, that we have not experienced, and therefore may communicate differently to us. You know, one of my greatest frustrations is I've seen in the autistic community a lot of non-speakers. They will be ostracized from the community for using language and communication different to what is culturally accepted in our community. But actually, by ostracizing them, they're being denied access to our community, and therefore not having the opportunity to be a part of the development of autistic culture. So we simultaneously ostracize and then criticize them for not being part, you know, and it's something that, you know, we all need to be aware. Yeah, do you know what, like neuronormativity and neurotypical culture, has done a lot of harm. But something that I wanted to get across is that actually in the autistic community, we all have different experiences as well. And there are people within our own community who are ostracized by us.
Yep. It happens in all marginalized groups. It really does. You will see, you know, in the queer community specifically, there's a huge problem. I mean, racism is rampant in wherever you go, but like there's a huge problem, a disproportionate problem of white cis gay men being extra racist towards other people, and sexist. Actually, there's a lot of sexism that is involved, and transphobia that is involved in that, like the intersectionality of it all, right? And it's just everywhere we go. Yes, we are human. That doesn't mean we're absolved just because we belong to one marginalized group or another. Doesn't mean we're absolved of biases that we were raised and conditioned in, you know. And that's part of acknowledging privilege. That's part of being introspective and extending empathy to other people's discussion of their own lived experiences. You know, like it comes to mind where I might, like with clairvoyant stuff, I might not experience that myself with like talking to spirits or seeing things like out in the world, but I'm not going to tell a friend or even a stranger that they don't have that experience, because how can I be an expert on their lived experience? I can't. I physically cannot. I can only be an expert on my own. So I know weird things have happened to me that are unexplainable and people might not believe. So it's like, it's that double empathy again. Like we have to extend understanding, even if or respect, at least, even if we don't understand.
Something that I have learned through being schizophrenic is, like, I can wake up one day and just be in a completely alternate reality that I will fundamentally believe is true. It's not quite as simple as waking up and it being like, bang, it's there, but for discussion purposes, let's say that's what happens. What that's taught me is that very little of what we experience is objective truth. Like, you can't tell someone you are not experiencing that, because, like, trust me, if you've been in my head during, like, I've had episodes where I've believed all sorts of things are real, and they are fundamentally real to me when that is happening. And it doesn't matter how much you tell me it's not real, it will not make it any less real for me.
For you, yeah.
Like, you know, I could be telling you, simply, like, I could be going like, the sky is green, and it doesn't matter how much evidence you give me that the sky is blue, I will still see a green sky, you know? Like,
we're in,
so much in life is subjective, and we tend to spend too much time trying to tell people what we believe is objective.
Yeah.
But the only thing we can be sure of is our own internal experiences. Everything else is down to perception.
Yeah. And we are living, so two things, because you touch on solipsism in your book as well. We are living in a co-creative existence, and you can call it a hallucination, you can call it a simulation, you can call it just reality, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it is a subjective, like a personally subjective experience combined with everyone else's subjective experience. And our co-creation, that term means that my subjective experience influences everybody else's around me, and all of theirs influences me. Like it is a constant bombardment of stimuli and cause and effect. And there's a lot of like consciousness involved, obviously, because if someone tells me the sky is blue or the sky is green, because that's their reality, and I disagree and say, well, the sky is blue to me, that's all that I can do. The sky is blue to me. And then we have social constructions based on that, where the majority of people will believe, yes, the sky is blue, therefore it is blue, right? This chair is a chair because we decide that a chair has 4 legs and a flat bottom, and you know, like we sit on it like that. And even then, the definition of a chair, if you're not way too precise, you're gonna be able to call a horse a chair, you know, like because it has 4 legs and you sit on it. Like it's just, it's still subjective, even within its objectivity of
And
the like
I know
agreed construction.
some people argue, oh, well, science shows us what's objectively
Oh my
true. You
God,
have to
science
consider that
is
our
theory.
entire interpretation of data is biased by our own subjective experiences.
Correct.
There are things which we have assumed to be true, which it's later turned out like there was a huge amount of bias in the researcher, and it biased how he or she or they interpreted the data. You know, like,
yeah,
everything is socially constructed. The best we can do is go, well, most people agree that this is true.
yeah.
So this is probably as close
Or
to objective truth as
evidence
we're going to get.
suggests, right? Like
Yeah,
evidence suggests. A scientist,
yeah,
true scientists use language that allows room for change, for growth,
yeah.
for relearning something. That is never an absolute fact, almost ever. In fact, I literally can't even think of anything. Even gravity is still considered a theory, agreed upon theory.
So theory and paradigm are probably the highest you can get in
Yeah.
science, because it means there is a strong body of evidence
Yes.
for them. You know, you've got your hypotheses, which is like ideas that are untested. You've got your theories and your paradigms, which we have like, you know, the theory has lots of evidence. The paradigm, I mean, the paradigm, in my opinion, effectively tells us how we interpret the evidence, you know, and as paradigms shift, our viewing of that evidence is going to shift. And as our viewing of that evidence shift, the theories and laws that we hold as scientific truths are going to change. Everything is socially constructed.
Right.
And I wanted to get that across in the book. You know, we as a community have to be aware that we are constructing not just our own realities, but the realities that everyone experiences. And, you know, as people in those other people's environment, we have a responsibility to make sure we are responsible with that power.
Oh my God, that is a huge responsibility. I wish I had my gender presentation up, because I have a quote. Actually, let me be rude real quick and go find it, because it's like, it's good. Where do I even find that? Maybe I can do it on my computer real quick. Sorry, y'all. Take two. Although there is a comment, Tanya Atkin, autistic consultant, trainer, and advocate, says, does make you wonder, has anything really changed apart from how honest those in power are about it? I'm assuming they were talking about the structures that be, right? And you even talk about this, like ableism specifically. Most of our structures are racist, ableist, sexist, you know, like those are the core things. And I think ableism specifically, like you say, is the core of all of those isms and phobias, and the structure just builds from there.
There was a writer called Mel Baggs, unfortunately is no longer with us, and they talked about the fact that ableism was at the root of just about every form of oppression, because when you break down the various forms of oppression and marginalization, they all come down to the idea that these marginalized groups are fundamentally less than, like, in the way they think and express.
Yep.
Now, it's a bit more complicated with racism, and I couldn't really comment on it, because you've got to take into account that there are people who literally just have a problem with the fact that someone has different colored skin.
Right.
But you can look, and the way that racism perpetuated was this idea that they were lesser humans,
right,
you know, less intelligent, less civilized. And you can see these elements of neuronormativity running through all of these different forms of marginalization and oppression. And the thing is, with the structures that exist within our society, and especially Western sort of Eurocentric society, they are designed to encourage assimilation into normative ideas. You know, everything is designed to say, this is how you should be, and if you don't assimilate into this, you're not a good person, you're not a worthy person. And what I wanted people to take away from my book is that actually it doesn't matter who you are. If you are not harming people, your existence is valid and enough.
Absolutely. So I found the quote, and I thank you. That was That was so beautifully said. We're all valid, y'all. People can tell you're not, but as long as you're not like actively harming people, you're valid. Whether you anyway. But so this quote, right, by Sam Young at aninjusticemag.com. This is their article, "What is a social construct?" And so the quote is, "The question isn't whether social constructs exist. The question is whether the ones we have are useful for us and help us create the type of world we all want for ourselves. Human beings have incredible power to create, build, and make sense of the world. These powers come with an immense responsibility to think carefully about what we cultivate. We have the ability to build systems together that best represent our values and create the type of life we want for everyone."
I think it's a really valid point, because especially like the social constructs that we live by at the moment were probably very useful when you think about times like the Industrial Revolution, when people were generating profit and advancing technology. I'm sure there probably was some usefulness, but we are in the 21st century. We are a more enlightened people. We have realized that the capitalist systems that we live by are predatory and not benefiting people.
Yep.
So the social constructs that uphold those systems, they need to go. They need to be rethought. And this is why where Nick Walker's book, Neuroqueer Heresies, really kicked in for me and really changed my thinking, because she talks about in the essay, "Throw away the master's tools." The people who built this system are not going to give us the tools to dismantle their system. We have to socially construct our own tools, our own constructions that will remove the current structures that oppress us.
100%. When that piece, Audre Lorde's piece that you're talking about, the master's tools won't dismantle the master's house.
Yeah.
That changed my life. That was my first like really eye-opening experience. I was taking a women's studies course in college to fill my race and ethnicity requirement. And it changed my life so much that I literally like continued to pursue a women's studies degree, which is, it's now gender studies, but at the time, but just the idea that, what's that other phrase about you can't put a fire out from within the house, right? It's the same concept. Like, if you're gonna make change really take place, you gotta break some shit with your own hands. Like,
this is what I want to see. I want to see an autistic community that comes together and gets their hands a bit dirty, dismantling the system. And any way you can contribute to that is valid. We don't all have to have huge platforms and be speaking to thousands of people. You know, the reason why a choir can sing an impossibly long note is because certain members can take a step back and breathe whilst the rest of the choir carries on singing. Whatever you can contribute is a valid part of that effort to dismantle the system.
Yes, thank you, David. That's actually a part that really resonated for me personally, because a lot of the time I get wrapped up in like imposter syndrome, as well as concern over my white privilege specifically, and my socioeconomic status, coming from a middle-class family. Like I've often been insecure about sharing my story or helping raise other people's voices for sharing their stories, because it's like, well, you're just another white person who doesn't deserve the time of day. And it's like, actually, that's colonialism speaking. That's the world that we're trying to dismantle, is by literally using my privilege to lift other people's voices up by sharing my own story, because I am marginalized in other ways. Like that is the point. That's what the people in power don't want. They want you to feel insecure. They want you to feel imposter syndrome. They want you to feel a certain kind of guilt. And I have to practice what I preach. I preach that every voice counts. Like you're saying, every voice matters, because that drop in the ocean quote, I literally, where is it?
You know, nothing you can do will amount to more than a drop in the ocean, but what is an ocean if not a multitude of drops?
Yes, exactly. My life amounts to no more. Yeah. That's the one. I love that. I love that because it paints such a beautiful imagery of what it is to be a part of collective activism, as you say in your book. Literally, we can't do this alone, and every voice counts because every voice is, you know, at odds with like we're I say the future is queer, and not in the sense of like just LGBTQ, but like queer in the sense of we are subversing and actively breaking down the structures that keep us in those boxes. So when we're queering things, I operate out of the bell hooks definition of queer, which is being at odds with your environment and having to pave your own way. And if we all do that collectively, the systems that be don't stand a chance, is what I'm getting at.
This is why neuroqueer theory has been so important to me. It's been transformative for me because it made me. The first thing you have to realize is that oppression is not a competition. Like, we're not here to go, well, I'm more oppressed than you, but you're more oppressed than me.
Right.
We are all oppressed. So we all need to speak out and lift each other up. You know, we need to know when it's our time to speak and when it's our time to lift up the voice of another. You know,
that is how we become accomplices, not just allies. That is how we get work done, is to use your privilege when you have it, and shut up when you need to, and speak when you need to, and then lift other people's voices when you need to. And it takes time to develop skill, and it's okay that you might fuck up. We're human, we fuck up. It's what do we do past the fuck up? How do we recognize the fuck up? How do we figure out the next best step to cause the least harm in the future and do the most good? That should be our concern as activists. Period.
Absolutely. And you know, we are each a drop in a massive ocean, you know, so we can't do this all on our own. So there's that idea that like, oh, well, I'm more oppressed, so I should have a louder voice. You're still just a drop in the ocean. So if you're speaking over all the other drops, it means just one drop got through. We need to make sure that all the drops get through to form an ocean that's going to wash away the oppressive structures.
Yeah, get that tidal wave going. All right. I love it. And I love Tanya Atkin again commented, oppression isn't pie. Just like rights, like human rights aren't a pie, neither is oppression. This isn't the pain Olympics. All right, folks, like we all suffer under the system. We all have a role to play in dismantling that system, period. Awesome. I want to look real fast at some of my notes. We talked a lot about, like, we've covered a lot actually. Yeah, we are at the hour mark. How are you feeling, David? Like, I want to check in.
I can go a little bit longer.
Okay. I think I may have to use the restroom is my only issue. So I don't want to like pause the flow, but I might have to. But that being said, oh, okay, so here's a quote. Where did it go? Oh no, we already talked about that, never mind. Oh, I love also you bring up autistic socializing and how neurotypical, like we are typically painted as asocial, non-emotive beings, right? That's the stereotype. And that's actually something that prevented me from finding my place, like finding my neurotype basically and claiming who I am, because I had known the stereotypes of autism and I definitely don't fit that mold. I am like over communicative, I am hypersensitive, hyper empathetic, loud, like people person, right? I am very social when I can be. And yeah, that stereotype just didn't allow me to break through. So I love that you talk about how we are social. We just might not be social in the acceptable ways. And we actually thrived a lot during the pandemic. I mean, not to say that the pandemic was a good thing at all, because it was horrible on all accounts, but we have silver linings. And one of those, I think, is discovering how we communicate as autistic people more, and also building communities while the world was on pause. I would love to dive into that if you're interested.
Absolutely. You know, I think the word I use is all social, like
Yeah, all social. I love that.
I want to be clear, that's not me saying there is one way that autistic people socialize. What it was for me was it's like waving a flag, basically. It's a nod again towards neuroqueer theory. As autistic people, we don't socialize in the typical way, in the normative way. We socialize through our own authentic expression of the self, and we celebrate each other's authenticity. And that is the fundamental basis of what would make what we need in a healthy autistic community, is a celebration of the fact that we are all going to approach things differently. And that is what all social is to me. It's the fact that we don't socialize in the way we're told we should. We socialize in the way that works for us. And what works for one group of autistic people might be different for another. It doesn't make them any less autistic than anyone else. You know, fundamentally, what we need to remember is that being autistic is more than diagnosis. It's an identity, it's a culture. And beyond that, it's a counterculture. It's a refusal to assimilate. And that is why I wrote the essay about I'm not asocial, I'm all social. Because I wanted people to recognize that if you don't socialize in the way that people say you should, it doesn't matter, because whatever works for you is fine.
Yeah, 100%. I love the term that you use, the asocial. I think that's fantastic. And I am particularly a fan of witnessing, I think, understanding my own autism, right? I've been able to develop more compassion and understanding for, and this typically happens as we understand ourselves more, we understand others more, or we at least can extend ourselves better. And, you know, I used to get really angry at people or annoyed when they wouldn't meet me at my level of socialization. And now I've come down a bit, and I've been able to understand that we're all different. Like, there's this one method painted as the method, but like, I might be hypersocial one day, and then finally I realize, oh, I need to recharge, and I can barely make full sentences, and that's valid. Just like, even just being, what do they call it? Parallel play, right? Where we're around each other, but we're not really talking with each other. Like, even seeing that as a valid form of socialization. Before, I would feel judged, or I would judge others for like not wanting to be talking all the time and super engaged, because I was taught if you're not super engaged, you're not being respectful, you're not interested, right? Like that blows my mind. Like, so much has changed since I've allowed my own identities to flourish. And I'm so grateful that we can even talk about it without shame. You know, that's huge.
Something I've realized, and this applies to everyone, no matter how your mind works.
I'm gonna be that person. Hang on, David. I'm gonna announce that I'm gonna go run to the bathroom really, really fast. You speak your mind. I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, something I've realized is that all the expectations that I have for how I believe people should or shouldn't express themselves is a projection of the trauma inflicted on me by the environment, and the trauma that other people have inflicted on me through the environment is in fact a projection of their own trauma. And this is how you get that intergenerational trauma, because you have one generation who are told this is how people should be. If you don't assimilate, you're no good. that causes trauma to that generation. They then project the ideas that they have about themselves onto the next generation, because the trauma has told them how they think the world should be. And yeah, they might see it differently from the people who inflicted it upon them, but they still have a fixed worldview of how things should be. And so they inflict this harm on the next generation, who inflict it on the next generation. And all of these ideas of this is how you should socialize, this is how you should express yourself, they are all manifestations of trauma that we have inflicted upon each other. Because when we have this fixed worldview that, well, this person isn't acting in the way they should, we need to recognize that what we are doing is projecting our own experience onto someone else. You know, as I said before, if someone is causing harm, then obviously something's got to be done. But the idea that there is a set way of being, set way of expressing anything, is a projection of the trauma that has been inflicted upon us as a people, us as individuals, because there is no fixed way of being. You know, even my idea of who I am at the moment, the way I express myself, it will probably change, because I'm not the person I was 10 years ago, and I probably won't be the same as the person I am now 10 years from now. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that people aren't fixed points. We all grow and change. And therefore, our ideas of how things should or shouldn't be need to grow and change with people.
That is so on point. My God. And I don't know if this was brought up while I was away, but it also is interesting to me to consider how a lot of autistic or neurodivergent, but specific to autism, I've seen anyway in my life, is the concept of like, well, I think it's because we have a well-developed sense of justice, right? So talking like social constructs don't really have a hold as much on us. Some are very like, no, I need the boxes because they feel safe. And then a lot of us are fuck the boxes. And especially when it comes down to taboo subjects, like normally, like what I just did, hey, I gotta go pee. I'll be right back.
I never, you know, it didn't even occur to me that other people might be like, that's weird. Like, I was just like, cool. Like, you know, and, you know, this is the thing, I think, with autistic culture. Like, if you want one defining thing in the culture of the autistic community, so we have a tendency to see through the bullshit of all the social constructs.
Yes.
Like,
yes,
that's probably one of the defining factors of being in the autistic community, is we have a tendency of looking at things that are taken for granted and going like, why is that considered normal? Like, you know, like, because in so many situations, like, if you said like, oh, I'm really desperate for the loo, I've got to go to the loo, people would be like, why are you telling me that? Like, but in the autistic community, it's like, well, you know, she's listening to her body. Like, she needs to, sorry, got your pronouns wrong. I'm so sorry. You know, they're saying like they need to go to the toilet. Like, of course they need to go to the toilet, because you're not going to sit there in discomfort. But the idea that we have to be a particular way, it's not, we can't get into that as autistic people, because we fundamentally exist on the periphery of normality. You know, and we're quite comfortable being there. In fact, I often wonder what would happen if being autistic became the normative standard. Like, would we all suddenly be really uncomfortable being at the center of normal? Because you know, I think we're quite comfortable on the outside of whatever it is that society wants us to assimilate into.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, you know, it's like that saying, you know, if Tetris taught me one thing, it's that when you fit in, you disappear. I don't want to disappear. Unless it's to go to the toilet, in which case I will.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I so appreciate this conversation. wondering, let me look real quick, sorry. Oh, okay, so I know we've talked a lot about certain aspects of like pathology and even okay, I guess I'll make a pseudo segue from what we're just talking about. Like even language, like the way we talk and the way that we like the what we talk about is often codified as sick or weird or like not normal, right? So I'm wondering, like we talked about the DSM, but I'm wondering if we can address pathology on a broader spectrum, because we've talked a lot about little like details of it, but your book uses this liminality, right? Like you talk about the liminal space between the pathological paradigm into the neurodiversity paradigm, and you claimed what was it? Well, you claimed no, neurocosmopolitanism. That was the end, right? Would you mind just like diving into that a little bit for our viewers, and like what actually, because the pieces that we've been talking about, we're talking about dismantling the structures that be. So what would come next, right? Like what would be the end result?
I was introduced once again through neuroqueer heresies to the idea of neurocosmopolitanism, and for me it's the logical endpoint to fully embracing the neurodiversity paradigm. It's a world in which people are not afforded privilege based on how their mind works. Everyone is treated equitably.
Yep.
It's complicated because everyone has competing needs.
Right.
But fundamentally, we have this idea of psychiatric pathology, of mental illness. And really what it is anything, as I said, that doesn't fit with our very colonial white-centric ideas in our current culture, is considered a pathology. And I believe the reason why this is done, whether people did it on purpose or not, the reason why it's done is because if you want to convince people that they need to change, the quickest way to do it is to tell them they're ill. Because if one thing has been true throughout humanity, is that being ill is bad. Because if you think from an evolutionary standpoint,
right,
thousands of years ago, if you got ill, you would probably die.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have medicine. But we have this really clever system now where we can go to people, you're ill, but don't worry, we can fix it.
We got the fix. Thank you,
like, and if it just so happens that the fix is $1 billion industry, like, oh, isn't that convenient, you know?
Yeah, and, super convenient.
You know, and so there is an entire field of medicine dedicated to normalizing people into normative standards that just so happens to very effectively contribute to capitalism. Now, I'm not going to say that I am against psychiatry. I'm schizophrenic. I have benefited from psychiatry. Like, I don't like the medication I take, but it has helped me. In the same way that an ADHD person might take ADHD meds. You know, we live in a certain structure of society, and as it currently stands, me running around telling everyone the sky is green apparently isn't going to work in that society. So I do what I have to do to get by. But wouldn't it be nice to move into a world where the environment wasn't so hostile to everyone, that everyone was experiencing some kind of distress that led to society then going, well, you need fixing. Like, no, I don't need fixing. It's the environment that needs fixing. And for me, a neurocosmopolitan society, fully embracing the neurodiversity movement means going, not that we need to accept people per se, but we need to accept that the environment we're putting people in is fundamentally broken by design, and we need to fix the environment that we exist in. Because we can't change people. It's like Nick, you know, I think it was Nick Walker again said, you can't unqueer a queer mind. Like, so what are you going to do if you've got a queer person who needs a queer environment? Let's queer up the environment a bit. Like, why are we spending so much time trying to normalize everyone when it's everything else outside of the person that is the problem?
100%.
Like, you can teach me how to pretend it's not a problem, but it doesn't make the environment any less problematic.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I think neurocosmopolitanism is not just the future where our neurotypes are, like you said, one doesn't have a privilege over the other just for existing. I think that future is also post labels, like, and for most of our identities, like, I can totally see where that world exists, that maybe gender and sexuality even are only relevant to how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to each other on a very like personal basis. Like, as long as we don't have discrimination, those labels are kind of obsolete, because again, there are as many genders as there are people, even in today's society, whether you think that or not, it's true. And sexuality, like, it's fluid. Like, yes, people can be fixed into one thing or another, but we have so many people with so many variations. Like, I can imagine a world where privilege is not afforded to one neurotype being the same as privilege not being afforded to one sexuality or one gender or one race.
It's the thing for me is neurocosmopolitanism is a world post-binary.
Yeah. Yes.
Like,
oh my God.
It's a world where we can recognize, you know what, like, I identify as a neurodivergent white male at the moment. Okay, the color of my skin's probably never going to change, not unless there's an aspect of science I'm very unaware of. But you know, that doesn't mean that 10 years from now I'm not going to feel more feminine, or you know, like, I always say, like, I don't like talking about my sexuality personally. Like, broadly I would say I'm pansexual, but I just say I'm queer because what I recognize is that, like, for example, I've never been attracted to a cisgendered male. Doesn't mean I won't be in the future. Like, this idea that everyone is at a fixed point in space and time, it's ridiculous. People grow and change. You know, the environment, our interactions with others alter our sense of self, and we interact with different things at different points in our life. So nothing is a fixed point. Nothing that is happening right now is an objective truth that you have to live with forever. So whether what you're experiencing right now is good or bad or whatever it is to you, everything changes. Everything changes. And a neurocosmopolitan society is a world where we don't have to put things into these false binaries anymore, because we recognize that all of human experience is fluid.
Yeah, 100%. That is a future I want desperately. Like, I could cry about it. In fact, I have cried about it several times. But it's I think those who are really rigid in their boxes, and not to say that they're not valid or that that's not like an acceptable way to live, I really do feel like they deny themselves of curiosity for what it is to be human. To be human is to evolve. To be human is to live in the moment and see what changes come your way, right? How you adjust based on the stimuli that is in your environment. So I'm not saying that they're any less of a human. No, I'm just saying that maybe they're closing themselves off before they can even see possibilities of something new. You know, that just, I don't know. I feel like moving into a neurocosmopolitan like society, that needs to happen less and less. essentially, because the more we realize we are fluid beings, the world is gray. Like, life is the gray area, you know, sliding scales all over the place. So the more we embrace that for what it is, then the more we will get closer to that neurocosmopolitan society. Like, I just, that makes sense to me. I'm not saying this is the truth, like absolute truth, but for me and the way that I've experienced life, that absolutely makes sense.
Is that diversity and inclusion have become these buzzwords in our society, and the truth is the self is not a fixed point, you know.
Yeah.
True diversity and inclusion is recognition that what we constitute as the self, our conceptualization of ourself, contains an infinite possibility.
Infinity.
Like, you have to, it's difficult to wrap your head around, but truthfully, our existence represents infinite possibility.
Yes.
And
yes,
each of those possibilities could be lived out at any given moment.
In fact, believing in the opposite, like, I'm sorry, I'm putting it in binary terms, but believing in the opposite of like clinging to the box and meeting the box, that to me, oh, fuck brain, go back. That was so good in my brain. Fuck. Yeah. Maybe that's what I was trying to say, actually, is that it's the binary, but no, that wasn't it. God damn it, brain. So you're saying, oh, it's challenging. It's scary. It's terrifying to have to understand, to conceptualize that we are infinite possibility. Oh, there we go. Thank you, brain. So it's terrifying, and there's power there. There is so much power there. And so we are taught in our systemic society that we are fixed points, right? That we're born a certain way, that we are conditioned to believe in that, born a certain way. We have culture, we have, I mean, culture is the playing field, right? And then we have within the culture, like religion, gender, sexuality, other dogma, other indoctrination, like just bombarding us, telling us who we are. And that's something you do talk about in the book, and we even talked about earlier in this chat, is like our sense of self is developed through a lot of other people's perception. So how do we get back to the I am, to the who am I? Who do I be outside of those projections, outside of those requirements by society? There's power there.
Yeah, and this is what the system doesn't want you to realize,
right?
Is that actually the I am, who am I, is whoever you want to be. It's whoever right. you want to be. Yep. You don't have to be anything that anyone tells you. And this is something I've said to people before, like, you know, people are like, you know, oh, what do you hope your child is when he grows up? Like, I don't know what my child's going to be when they grow up, because when I created a child, I had to accept that I had created infinite possibilities. Like, and any attempt to guide my child into a particular idea of who they are is me restricting those possibilities, which is what's been done to me. And I'm not going to contribute to that cycle of trauma of saying
cycle of trauma. Oh my God, I'm sorry, but that just, it's a cycle of fucking trauma.
You know, we have to accept that each of us represents a multitude, you know, infinity. We are legion. We are all things and everything. Like, we are whatever we want to be.
Well, and this speaks to my own spirituality, actually, now that we're really digging into it. We are the universe experiencing itself.
Exactly, and I strongly believe that. You know, I was raised in a Christian household. My mother is a priest. I have my own traumas around Christianity, but also relate to some of the aspects of Christianity. But for me, my spirituality rests on the fact that I am part of the universe in its entirety. I am a small part of that, experiencing itself, and I affect how that universe, other small parts of that universe experience themselves. So it's one of my favorite books, Cloud Atlas, it says, by each crime and every kindness we birth our future. And the idea that everything we do ripples out throughout time, and those ripples have more and more effects the further they go. So we have a responsibility to do well with what we're given. And given that what we're given is infinite possibility, like, that's a big responsibility. Like, so, do what you can, and whatever you can do is valid, but make sure that what you're doing is not overtly harmful.
And again, humans make mistakes, right? So even if it's not overtly harming, if we learn through someone else's lived experience that it was covertly harming, not ill-intended, but that it did cause harm, that's the difference between intent versus impact, right?
When we come back to privilege and intersectionality, because it's that recognition that just because we don't view something as harmful doesn't mean that it wasn't harmful to another person.
Right. And it doesn't make us a bad person either. Sorry, I just want to throw that out there.
Like, do you know what? I have done the things that normative society would say are dreadful. I am a recovering drug addict. I'm 7 years sober. I was involved in gangs and all sorts. I was, by all intents and purposes of our current society, not a good person for many years. But do you know what? I recognize I did harm, whether I meant to or not. And now I'm doing better because I'm not a bad person. I was in a shitty place. I did shitty things. And now I know better and I'm in a better place. I'm trying to do better.
Because when we know better, we do better. That is like one of my utmost beliefs of human responsibility. Like, just to exist as a human, it is our responsibility, our obligation to do better when we know better.
Progress is not a straight path either. It
curves
round, goes back on itself.
Absolutely.
Progress ultimately takes us forward, but it doesn't mean we haven't spent a few years walking kind of backwards to then turn around and go forward again.
Right.
It's not a straight line. Like, people see progress as this constantly moving forward. That's not what progress is. Like, sometimes you have to double back on yourself and check where you've been,
right,
to then move forward with any sort of certainty.
Yes. I do want to take a quick rewind to one of Tanya's comments. There's a common misconception that neurodiversity means ignoring the things that we struggle with. That's not the case. I would argue that the ND paradigm isn't even positive. It's just pathological. That says a lot about our society when non-pathological descriptors are thought to be hugely positive. Just like when you leave an abusive relationship. Hi, I've done that several times. That's part of my drama. Leave an abusive relationship to find a relationship that is just like average, and that person is showing you like basic decent respect and human decency, basically, and you're like blowing it way out of proportion and praising them. Oh my god, thank you for like making me a meal or cleaning up or taking me, like just basic things that partners do for each other. It's like blown out of proportion, and I agree with that assessment. It's like, sorry, this was not related pretty much at all to what we were just talking about, but like,
absolutely it is.
I mean, it is, but yeah. But like, it is very telling and reflective of our society when knowing the neutrality of being non-pathological is so like, it has such a positive effect. Like that's wild.
People don't want to admit this, but the reason that depathologizing feels so good is because we have been in an abusive relationship with ourselves, thanks to the way we were conditioned by society.
Yes, and it took me in particular a very long time, years.
Something that I like to reflect on when I'm thinking shitty thoughts about myself is, if I saw someone else doing this to another person, would I think that was okay?
Yes, that.
That doesn't mean that I never think shitty things about myself. I do it a lot. Like, I have all manner of weird things going on in my head at any given moment. Like, but like, it's that realization that everything is neutral. Like, good and bad is subjective. There is no objectively good or bad. It depends on the person, you know. So when we're going like, oh, so maybe I'm not mentally ill, like if we have a really positive reaction to that, that should tell you, well, actually, I've been thinking really poorly about myself. Like,
Yeah.
and if we have a really negative reaction to the idea that mental illness isn't an illness, we need to think, why do I think it's a bad thing that I'm not ill? Like, what
Right.
have I been taught throughout my life
Right.
that has made me want to believe there is something in me that needs fixing?
Yes, because mental illness, as we've discussed, is basically a social construct. So what other social construct is telling us to believe that that is so bad, right? Like what you're saying, like that is absolutely true. And I so appreciate that we're talking about this
There's
because
a
mental health,
book, there
ooh,
is a book that everyone needs to read, and I
okay,
can't
what is
remember
it?
the author's name, but it's called The Social Construction of Reality.
Ooh, who's it by? Do we know?
I'm trying to remember. Hang on, I've got it open on my Kindle here. It is by Peter L. Bergman and Thomas Luckman.
Okay.
And it's basically about the sociology of knowledge and how all of our knowledge is socially constructed. And
I
I've
need
been
it.
reading it, and it is mind-blowing.
Oh my God, I need it. I need it so bad. This is one of my dedicated interests right now. Basically, is social constructionism.
Me too. Me too.
Like it blows my mind, and I love it. I
This
love
is
flushing
it's a
with
big
people's
problem for
perceptions
me.
like
It's a
that.
big problem for me because people outside of the autistic community, they're like, David, you're all right, you got something on your mind. And I can't tell them that what is on my mind is the fact that nothing is
It's
real.
real.
Because they will just assume that I'm having another episode. And I'm like, no, it's not that I'm having an episode. It's just a realization, an epiphany that everything we hold to be true has been built by society.
Yeah.
Like, and we can't actually prove it's true. Like, no one wants to have that conversation with me because apparently they don't have like 10 years to spare. Like,
Oh my God, that's too true. That's too true. Yeah, no, I feel that because I'm very good at having these discussions with fellow neurodivergents. It seems to be an acceptable conversation to have. But when I try to like dive into really deep philosophical stuff, specifically about our reality, our shared reality, I'm often met with disdain or confusion or like, you're weird, please get away from me. Like, or like, I don't have time for this. Can we stop?
like, you know, people get really uncomfortable. You can't just like walk up to someone and be like, have you ever thought about the fact that we can't prove our shared reality is actually shared? Like, that's not like an icebreaker or anything. Like, you say that to someone else, they're going to have one or two reactions. Like, they're either going to walk away from you, like, why are you being so weird? Or they're going to stand there and have an existential crisis.
Existential
Like,
crisis. Yes, and they get mad at you.
yeah, like, why are you doing this to me? Like, everything I hold true is not true, and I don't know what's real. Like, people don't have these conversations in normal life, and that's because we've been taught it's not normal to have these conversations. Like, but actually, it should be, because we
It
should
should be.
constantly be assessing what we hold to be true, and that is
Yes.
the fundamental basis of my book.
Okay. That's it. That's our closing.
Yeah,
That's our closing comment.
yeah.
Because that
We
that
have
really is.
really got into it.
Yeah.
We have really got into it. Like, this has probably been the most in-depth interview about my book so far.
It's been an honor, David. Truly
You're
though.
very good at interviewing people about books.
Oh, thank you. It's truly my pleasure. I love. At first, I love having my own perceptions, right, from someone's author voice, and then I love diving into the behind the scenes,
Yeah.
and really getting at the nitty gritty of like what produced this work, because I find that written expression is very powerful, but so is spoken, and they're different, though they're related. And we can gain more insight when they're combined. So I just
tonight or this afternoon, if you're on J6 time, we've really got into some of the frameworks and structures of my own reality. So
mine too. we really dove way down.
I really hope there's not a multitude of people out there currently having like a full-on identity / existential crisis, because I get that some of the stuff we have talked about has been really intense. But if you're into intense things, buy my book.
Do that. Do buy the book. Again, you can find it in the link in the video description. This is what it looks like. It's super accessible and super sensory pleasing. If you like matte texture, I fucking love it. And
some might say that having it on Amazon is ironic, because Amazon is a tool of the capitalist structure,
right.
And this is like the opposite of that, and they don't realize that I am making money by selling it through them.
Right. No, honestly, like, you can look at it the one way, but you can also see that you're infiltrating that matrix by selling it there, because not only is it more accessible to you, but you're taking advantage of the accessibility by preaching about shit that is antithetical to its very existence. Like, that's amazing.
I don't realize I'm doing that yet, so
we'll be quiet.
I don't know what happens if they realize.
Your book is banned for life. No.
If I disappear, you need to investigate a man called Jeff Bezos.
On it, noted. Hopefully we won't get to that point, but well, David, thank you again so much for joining me on this adventure of a discussion. I so value your work and your opinions, and just the way that you share yourself with the world, and the work that you do off the internet and off, not even in your book, like the consultancy stuff, your blog, everything. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you through Academy, and now we're here like a year later. Like, I just started doing that, so it's just, this is a really cool full circle kind of thing. Like, I see the building of the spiral going up.
It is, and I do believe we've arranged to have another one of these chats on my podcast. So, people need to look out for that as well. David's Divergent Discussions, JSIC will be there.
I'm so excited, very much looking forward to it. So thank you for hosting me. And yeah, I like that we can trade hosting. It's so fun.
Absolutely.
So, all right, well, thank you everyone who tuned in and participated in the chat. I'm sorry if I did miss some of your comments, but I'm going to go back through later and maybe like respond if I can. But thank you so much for contributing just your presence and witnessing this adventure of a conversation and David's work, which is very important stuff. I'm really grateful that it's out in the world. So thank you, David.
What you can do is valid.
Correct. I'm gonna take it and run with it. I hope everybody else does too. All right, be good to yourselves, y'all. Much love. Have a good night.